Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're heading to Alaska for 6 true scary stories that will give you chills. These come from real people, diner waitresses, bus drivers, store workers, and others who saw things they can't explain in Alaska's freezing cold and endless dark. These stories were found in personal journals, police reports, and recordings that were never meant to be shared with anyone. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Midnight for scary, true stories every single day. Hit that bell so you never miss when we share the most terrifying content. Now let's go to Alaska, where the cold can kill you in minutes and something much worse hides in the darkness waiting for you. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working the night shift at Big Eddie's Diner for 8 months now. I'm 28, a single mom with a 6-year-old daughter named Sophia. Before this job, I worked at 3 different places during the day, but none of them paid enough to cover rent and childcare. The night shift pays better, and honestly, I like it. The truckers are good people, they tip well, and Eddie treats me like family. Big Eddie's sits right at the junction where Highway 1 meets the Glen Highway, about 30 miles outside Anchorage. It's a classic truck stop diner, red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, and a long counter with spinning stools. The neon sign outside flickers sometimes, but it's been doing that for years. We get a steady flow of customers all night long, long-haul truckers, shift workers heading home, and the occasional tourist who took a wrong turn. I know all the regulars by name. There's Big Jim, who drives the Kenworth and always orders coffee with 3 sugars and a slice of apple pie. Sarah from the night cleaning crew at the hospital stops by for a burger and fries around 4 a.m. Tommy runs freight to Fairbanks twice a week and drinks his coffee black with a grilled cheese sandwich. These people aren't just customers. They're like my extended family. My routine is simple. I get to work at 11 p.m., prep the coffee machines, stock the pie case, and make sure everything's ready for the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. rush when most of the trucks roll through. Eddie leaves around midnight after making sure I'm all set up. During my shift, Sophia stays with Mrs. Chen next door. She's been watching Sophia since I started this job, and Sophia loves her like a grandmother. Life was finally getting better. I was saving money, thinking about taking some classes at the community college. Eddie even talked about promoting me to day manager if I wanted reg. Euler hours again. Everything felt stable for the first time in years. Then he showed up. It was March 15th, 3:17 a.m. Exactly. I remember because I was refilling the coffee maker and glanced at the clock when I heard the door chime. I looked up and froze. This man had to duck to get through the doorway. He was tall, not just regular tall, but wrong tall. His arms hung down past his knees and his fingers looked too long for his hands. When he walked to the counter, his movements were weird, like he wasn't used to his own body. "Coffee and pie," he said. His voice sounded normal, but his mouth barely moved when he spoke. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight over bones that didn't seem to fit right underneath. "What kind of pie?" I asked, trying to act normal. We had apple, cherry, and chocolate cream. "Any kind." I poured his coffee and cut a slice of apple pie. When he sat in booth 7, the whole thing creaked like it was holding much more weight than it should. The diner suddenly felt cold, and the fluorescent lights started flickering. Big Jim was finishing his usual slice when this guy walked in. After about 5 minutes, Jim threw a 20 on the table and left without even finishing his coffee. Sarah, who was just starting her burger, wrapped it up and left too. Within 15 minutes, the diner was empty except for me and this thing. I say thing because I was already starting to realize he wasn't human. He never blinked. Not once. He just stared at the other customers like he was studying them. When Big Jim left, the man said, "Jim drives the blue Kenworth, takes I-5 to Seattle twice a month, has a wife named Linda and 2 kids." I'd never told anyone those details about Jim. I didn't even know his wife's name. When he paid, the bills looked normal but felt wrong, too smooth and slightly warm, like they'd been in someone's pocket for hours. The next night is D. He came back at exactly 3:17 a.m. Same order, coffee and pie, but he never ate the pie. He just broke it apart with those long fingers, making little patterns with the pieces. After he left, I found strange symbols scratched into the booth where he'd been sitting. They looked burned into the vinyl. The coffee cup was worse. There was residue in the bottom that wasn't coffee. It was thick and dark and smelled like metal, like blood. By the fourth night, my regular customers started avoiding the diner. Business dropped in half. The truckers would radio each other, warning people about the creepy guy at Big Eddie's. Eddie found dead birds in the parking lot every morning, arranged in perfect circles. The security cameras stopped working whenever this thing showed up. The footage would just cut to static from 3:15 to 3:45 a.m. every night. That's when he started asking about me. "You have a daughter," he said on the sixth night, his voice flat and wrong. "Sophia, 6 years old, goes to Birchwood Elementary." My blood went cold. "How do you know that?" "She walks to school at 8:15 a.m. Mrs. Chen picks her up at 3:30 p.m. Red backpack with flowers." I wanted to run, but I was stuck behind the counter. Eddie was gone. No other customers. Just me and this thing that knew where my daughter went to school. "She's safe," he said, like he was reading my mind. For now. The next morning I did research. I found stories on native Alaskan websites about something called the Tall Walker, an ancient thing that followed trade routes, hunting travelers who were alone. The stories went back centuries, but they all described the same creature, impossibly tall, wrong proportions, able to mimic human voices. It feeds on people who travel alone, truckers, late-night workers, people like me. I learned it could perfectly copy voices of people it had consumed. On the 8th night, it proved it. It spoke to me in Big Jim's voice, saying things only Jim would say. Then it switched to Sarah's voice, talking about her kids. But Jim and Sarah hadn't been to the diner in 4 days. "When I've been watching your highways for decades," it said in its own voice. "Learning, adapting. This location is perfect. People come and go, no one tracks them closely. I can study feeding patterns, select the best prey." It leaned forward, those impossible long arms stretching across the table. "I've consumed 47 drivers on these routes. Their memories help me hunt better." My hands were shaking as I refilled his coffee. "What do you want?" "Your daughter would be excellent bait. Children draw protective instincts. Adults make mistakes trying to save them." That's when I snapped. I'd been doing research all week, reading everything I could find about this thing. The old stories mentioned it was vulnerable to intense heat and bright light. It hunted at night, avoided fires, stayed away from well-lit areas. I had a plan. I waited until it was distracted, then I flipped on every light switch in the diner. The main fluorescents, the heat lamps, the pie case lights, everything. I cranked the industrial fryer to maximum heat and started dumping oil into every pan I could find. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal tearing. Its fake human appearance started melting away, revealing what it really was. Multiple joints in its arms and legs, bending in directions that weren't possible. Its face stretched and twisted, showing rows of teeth that didn't belong in a human mouth. "You think kitchen equipment can stop me?" it hissed. "Not stop," I said, backing toward the walk-in freezer. "Just slow you down." I'd been working in restaurants for years. I knew every piece of equipment, every safety protocol, every emergency system, including the industrial heating unit that connected to the walk-in freezer for defrosting. The creature lunged at me. I dodged and slammed the freezer door behind us both. In the dark, cold space, I could hear it moving, those joints clicking and scraping against the walls. I found the manual override for the heating system and cranked it to maximum. The freezer started heating up fast, way faster than it was designed for. The temperature rose from below zero to over 200 degrees in minutes. The thing was screaming now, its false human form completely gone. In the red emergency lighting, I could see its true shape, something that had never been human, something ancient and hungry that had been feeding on travelers for centuries. The heat was too much for both of us. I passed out just as the freezer door automatically opened from the pressure release. When I woke up, Eddie was shaking me awake. It was 7 a.m. The creature was gone, just a pile of what looked like melted wax and burned fabric where it had been. The police came, but there wasn't much to investigate. The security cameras had malfunctioned. No other witnesses. They found evidence in the creature's remains that connected it to dozens of missing truckers over the past 20 years, but officially it went down as an animal attack. Eddie renovated the diner after that. Better lighting, updated security cameras, and he renamed it Maria's Safe Haven. The truckers still come by and they spread the story across their networks. Now drivers know this is a safe place to stop. Eddie promoted me to day manager and gave me a bonus from the reward money for solving the missing truckers case. I started my college fund and enrolled in classes. Sophia's proud of her mom. She tells everyone her mommy is a hero. But I still work some night shifts. Someone needs to watch the highways, make sure nothing else like that thing decides to hunt our roads. The truckers trust me now. They know I'll keep them safe. Sometimes late at night I see things moving in the darkness beyond the parking lot lights, but they don't come closer. Word travels fast among the things that hunt in the dark. They know this place is protected. They know Maria's watching. And if anything like that creature ever shows up again, I'll be ready. Because no one threatens my family, my customers, or my highways. Not on my shift. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been driving school buses for 12 years. I know every pothole on Route 47, every turn in the road, and every kid who climbs aboard my bus each morning. I drive through rural Alaska, picking up children from isolated homesteads and cabins scattered across 80 miles of wilderness. It's not an easy job, but I love it. These kids depend on me to get them safely to school and back home, no matter what the weather throws at us. Route 47 serves 23 children from kindergarten through high school. Their families are farmers, hunters, and folks who chose to live far from city life. Some of these homesteads are so remote that my bus is the only connection these kids have to the outside world during winter months. I know every family personally. The Hendersons who run cattle, the Kowalski family with their vegetable farm, old Mrs. Chen who homeschools her grandkids most of the year but sends them to town for science classes. The route takes 3 hours each way. I start at 5:30 a.m. when it's still dark, warming up the bus and checking the CB radio, first aid kit, and emergency supplies. The district requires all that safety equipment, but honestly, I'd carry it anyway. These roads can be dangerous. One wrong turn in a blizzard, one mechanical problem, and you could be stranded for days. The families trust me completely with their most precious cargo. Some of these kids' older brothers and sisters rode my bus years ago. I'm like an uncle to most of them. My safety record is perfect. Never had an accident, never lost a child, never had a serious incident. The school district knows they can count on Jake Morrison. I was even planning to retire in a couple years and train my replacement personally. I wanted to make sure whoever took over would understand how important these relationships are. But what happened last November changed Ev. Everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd been driving through for over a decade. What I discovered living in those woods still keeps me awake at night. It started on a Tuesday morning in late November. The temperature had dropped to -20 and fresh snow covered the road from the storm the night before. I was running my usual route, picking up the Peterson kids from their cabin near mile marker 15, when I heard something that stopped me cold. Children's voices were calling from deep in the forest. At first I thought maybe some of the kids had gotten off the bus early to play in the snow, but as I listened I realized the voices were coming from areas where no children lived. Worse, they sounded exactly like my regular students. I could hear Tommy Kowalski's voice calling, "Help me, Mr. Jake!" and little Sarah Henderson crying, "I'm lost!" The kids on the bus heard it too. Their faces went white, and Tommy, the real Tommy sitting in seat 12, whispered, "That's not me, Mr. Jake. That's not me calling." I stopped the bus and grabbed my CB radio. "Base, this is Bus 47. We've got some kind of emergency situation at mile marker 15. Requesting backup." Static. Nothing but static. The voices in the woods got louder, more desperate. Now I could hear Mrs. Chen calling her granddaughter's name, using the exact tone and accent she always used. But Mrs. Chen lived 15 miles away, and there was no way she could be out here in the forest. I made a decision that probably saved our lives that first day. I didn't investigate. I didn't get off the bus to help what sounded like children in distress. Instead, I put the bus in gear and drove away as fast as the icy roads would allow. The kids were quiet the rest of the morning. Some of them kept looking out the windows toward the tree line like they expected to see something looking back. The next morning, I almost called in sick. But 23 kids were counting on me and their parents needed to get to work. I loaded up the bus with extra emergency supplies and made sure my CB radio was working perfectly before heading out. The voices started earlier this time, right at mile marker 10 near the old logging road. But now there were more of them. I could hear what sounded like every parent on my route calling their children's names. Perfect mimicry, Bill Henderson's deep voice, Maria Santos's Spanish accent, even old Henrik Peterson's Norwegian pronunciation of his daughter's name. "Those aren't our parents," whispered Emma Chen from the back of the bus. She was pointing toward the tree line where I could see shapes moving between the trees. They looked like people, but something about the way they moved wasn't right. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The voices followed us for 3 miles, always staying just inside the tree line, always just out of clear sight. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In my rearview mirror, I could see extra reflections. The bus was full of children, but there were more faces in the mirror than kids in the seats. The extra faces looked like my students, but their expressions were wrong. They smiled too wide, and their eyes didn't blink enough. I spent Wednesday night researching. I called my friend Bill, who'd been hunting these woods for 30 years. He told me stories his grandfather had told him, old legends about things that lived in the deep forest, things that could copy human voices and faces, things that were always hungry. Thursday morning, I saw something that almost made me quit on the spot. I pulled up to the Henderson place to pick up Sarah and her little brother Mike. Sarah was standing at the bus stop like always, wearing her pink winter coat and backpack with the unicorn patches. She climbed aboard and took her usual seat. But when I reached the next stop at the Kowalski farm, there was Sarah Henderson again. Same pink coat, same backpack, same everything. The Sarah on the tour. Bus started crying when she saw her duplicate.
"That's not me," she sobbed. "That's not me, Mr. Jake. Don't let her on the bus."
The duplicate Sarah at the bus stop waved and smiled. She knew she should get on the bus. She knew this was her route. But something about her movement was wrong. Too jerky, like a marionette being controlled by someone who'd never operated one before. I closed the bus door and drove past the duplicate. In my side mirror, I watched her face change. The sweet smile twisted into something angry and hungry. She started running after the bus with movements that no human child could make, her legs bending at impossible angles. That's when I realized what was happening. Something in the woods was taking my kids and replacing them with copies. Perfect copies that knew everything the real children knew, but couldn't quite move like human beings. I started testing the children with little games and jokes that only the real kids would understand. The duplicates could answer questions about their families and their lives, but they couldn't laugh at the right moments. They couldn't show real fear or genuine happiness. They were like robots wearing the faces of children. By Friday, I counted 5 duplicates among my regular passengers. 5 of my kids had been replaced by things that weren't human. I couldn't go to the police. Who would believe a story about shape-shifting creatures replacing children? I couldn't tell the parents. How do you explain that the child who came home for dinner isn't really their child? I spent the weekend researching everything I could find about Alaskan folklore, indigenous legends, and cryptid sightings. What I found made my hands shake as I read. The creature hunting my kids matched descriptions of a corrupted wendigo, something that had once been human but had been twisted by consuming others. But this one had evolved beyond the normal wendigo legends. It had learned to perfectly copy human appearance, voice, and memories. The old stories said creatures like this would collect people, especially children, to study them. They'd create perfect replicas to infiltrate human communities, slowly replacing entire populations. The real people were kept alive somewhere, used as templates for the copies. I realized I was the only one who could tell the difference. Parents saw their children come home each night and never noticed the subtle wrongness. Teachers at school didn't catch the missing emotional responses. But I spent 3 hours a day with these kids. I knew how they laughed, how they fidgeted, how they looked when they were scared or happy. Monday morning, I loaded my bus with more than just emergency supplies. I brought a hunting knife, a flare gun, and every piece of iron I could find. Old legend said creatures like this couldn't stand the touch of cold iron. The creature was getting bolder. As I drove my route, I could see it watching from the tree line, a tall, gaunt figure that moved like smoke between the trees. Sometimes it looked human. Sometimes its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, and head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. It had taken 8 children now. More than a third of my passengers were duplicates. The real children were somewhere in the deep woods, probably frightened and cold, waiting for someone to rescue them. I was their only hope. Using my knowledge of the back roads and old logging trails, I followed the duplicates when they thought I wasn't watching. After I dropped them off at school, I'd see them walking into the forest instead of going to their classes. They moved in a group, all of them walking with that same jerky, unnatural gait. I followed them for 5 miles through terrain no school bus could navigate. They led me to a cave system I'd never seen before, hidden behind a wall of ice and fallen trees. The air around the cave mouth was warm despite the November cold, and I could smell something terrible coming from deep underground, like meat that had been left to rot for years. I heard voices coming from inside the cave, children's voices, real children, crying and calling for help. I radioed every emergency frequency I could find. "This is Jake Morrison, bus route 47. I've found kidnapped children at coordinates." But every frequency just returned static, like something was jamming the signals. I was on my own. I tied a rope around a tree and descended into the cave system. The walls were covered with scratches that looked like tally marks, hundreds and hundreds of them. How many people had this thing taken over the years? Deep in the cave, I found them. 8 children huddled in a natural chamber, scared but alive. They'd been kept in a space just warm enough to survive, fed just enough to stay healthy. The creature needed them alive to maintain its copies. "Mr. Jake!" Sarah Henderson ran to me, the real Sarah with tears of relief in her eyes. "We knew you'd come find us." But as I gathered the children to lead them out, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps in the tunnel behind us, moving with that same unnatural rhythm. The creature had returned to its lair. What emerged from the deeper tunnels barely looked human anymore. 8 feet tall, with arms that dragged on the ground and a face that kept shifting between different people I knew. Sometimes it wore Bill Henderson's features, sometimes Mrs. Chen's face. Sometimes it looked like me. "You shouldn't have come here, Jake," it said in my own voice. "I was going to let you live. You were useful, bringing me new children to study." The real kids pressed close behind me, trembling but trying to be brave. These were tough children, raised in the Alaskan wilderness. But they'd never faced anything like this. "I've been collecting for so long," the creature continued, its voice shifting between different people from town. "Soon I'll have enough copies to replace everyone. The parents, the teachers, the shop owners. This whole region will be mine." I pulled out the flare gun and fired it, directly at the creature. It screamed, a sound like breaking glass and tearing metal, and stumbled backward. The light and heat seemed to hurt it more than the impact. "Iron burns it," I shouted to the kids. "Remember that if you ever see something like this again." I threw my hunting knife, and where it struck the creature's shoulder, smoke rose from the wound. It roared and charged, but I pushed the children toward the cave entrance and followed, using my emergency flare to keep the thing at bay. We ran through those tunnels like our lives depended on it, because they did. Behind us, I could hear the creature crashing through the cave system, howling in rage and pain. We reached the surface just as my backup flare died out. The creature stopped at the cave mouth, hissing and snarling, but not following us into the daylight. "Sunlight," whispered Tommy Kowalski. "It can't come out in the sun." Smart kid. I gathered all 8 children and led them back to where I'd hidden my truck. We drove straight to town, and I didn't stop until we reached the police station. The official report said the children had been kidnapped by a transient who'd been living in the cave system. They said he'd died in a cave-in during the rescue, which explained why no body was found. The cave system was sealed with concrete and marked as unstable ground. The duplicate children never returned to school. Parents reported their kids acting more normal than they had in weeks, which was the truth. The real children were home safe. I finished out the school year, but I couldn't bring myself to drive Route 47 anymore. Every time I looked at those woods, I wondered if there were others like that creature living in the deep places. The school district promoted me to transportation supervisor for the entire region, which means I now train new drivers and plan safe routes for all our rural buses. I tell new drivers to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, if the kids act strange, if you hear voices where there shouldn't be any, don't investigate alone. Radio for backup, even if it sounds crazy. And always carry iron and a strong light. Some of the kids from Route 47 still wave when they see me around town. The real ones, anyway. They know I'll always come looking if they need help. That's what we do for family. And after 12 years on these roads, that's what they are to me. I still drive buses, just different routes now. Safer routes. But sometimes on quiet winter mornings when the CB radio picks up strange frequencies, I hear children's voices calling from the deep woods. Different voices now from different routes. The creature I killed wasn't the only one out there. I keep my flare gun loaded and my hunting knife sharp, because somewhere in rural Alaska, another bus driver might need to make the same choice I did. And I hope, when that time comes, they'll be ready to protect their kids the way I protected mine. The wilderness is full of things that hunger for what makes us human. But as long as there are people willing to stand between the darkness and the innocent, those things won't win. They'll never win. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been working in retail management for 12 years. Started as a stock boy right out of high school, worked my way up through cashier, department supervisor, and finally, night manager. I've handled everything from Black Friday stampedes to armed robberies, drunk customers, and that one time, someone tried to return a half-eaten turkey on Christmas morning. But what happened during my shift at Megamart in Fairbanks last winter changed everything I thought I knew about the people who shop at 3 a.m. I've been the night manager at Megamart for 3 years now. It's the only 24-hour grocery store in Fairbanks, which means we get all kinds of people between midnight and 8 a.m. Nurses getting off late shifts, security guards grabbing energy drinks, construction workers picking up lunch before dawn jobs. The pay is decent. Night differential bumps my salary up enough that I can afford my apartment and still send money for my kids' school supplies. See, I'm divorced. Sarah got custody, but she's good about letting me see Emma and Jake after school. Working nights means I'm free during the day, so I can pick them up from school, help with homework, make dinner. It's not perfect, but it works. The plan is to move to day management eventually, but right now I need that extra $2 an hour. Our store sits on the edge of town, surrounded by empty parking lots and a few fast food places that close by 10. During winter, which is most of the year in Fairbanks, it gets dark by 3 p.m. By the time my shift starts at 11 p.m., the world outside those big glass windows is just blackness and streetlights. The regular customers become like family. There's Janet, an ER nurse who stops in every Tuesday for yogurt and granola bars. Frank, the security guard from the office complex next door, always buys the same frozen dinners. Mrs. Patterson, an insomniac who wanders the aisles for hours, sometimes buying a single greeting card just to have human contact. I know their schedules, their preferences, their stories. Sometimes I'm the only person they talk to all night. Most nights are quiet. I spend my time restocking shelves, checking inventory, preparing for the morning rush. The store has this peaceful feeling after midnight, soft music playing, fluorescent lights humming, the occasional beep from the self-checkout when someone scans their midnight snack. It's meditative almost, just me and the night shift stalkers, keeping the world running while everyone else sleeps. That Tuesday in January started like any other. Temperature was -15 outside, which is practically warm for Fairbanks in winter. Janet came in at 11:30 for her usual yogurt run. Frank showed up at midnight sharp, microwave burritos and a Red Bull. Everything normal, everything routine. Then at 2:17 a.m., they walked in. I noticed them immediately because they moved wrong. You know how people walk into a grocery store? There's a rhythm to it. They grab a cart or basket, maybe pull out their phone to check a list, head toward whatever section they need. These three moved like they were learning how to walk. Stiff, deliberate steps. No cart, no basket, no phone. They split up without talking. No discussion about who was getting what. No, I'll grab the milk while you get the bread. Just three people walking in different directions, like robots following programming. The first one headed to the meat department. I watched him on the security monitors. Tall guy in a thick winter coat, hood up even though it was warm inside. He stood in front of the raw meat cooler for 10 minutes, not moving, not looking at prices or labels, just staring. Finally, he loaded his arms with packages of ground beef, not using a basket, and just carrying them against his chest like firewood. The second one went to household goods. Short woman, also wearing a coat with the hood up. She grabbed bleach, ammonia, hydrogen when they came through checkout. They knew things. The first one, buying the meat, looked right at me and said, "How's Emma doing with her math homework?" I froze. Emma is my daughter. She'd been struggling with fractions, but I'd never mentioned that at work. Never talked about my kids' schoolwork with customers. "What did you say?" He tilted his head like he was confused by his own words. I said, "How's the weather tonight?" But I knew what I'd heard. He'd asked about Emma's math homework. The second customer, carrying the chemicals, smiled at me while I scanned her items. "Jake's soccer practice is Thursday nights, right? At the elementary school?" My blood went cold. Jake does have soccer practice Thursday nights at the elementary school. But I'd never told anyone at work about that. Ever. "I'm sorry?" She blinked slowly, like a reptile. I said, "Paper or plastic?" One by one, they all came through my line, and each one said something they shouldn't have known. About my kids' school schedule, about my ex-wife's new job, about the apartment complex where I live. Personal details that I'd never shared with anyone at work. But whenever I questioned them, they acted confused and repeated something completely normal, like they'd temporarily said the wrong lines. After they left, I spent an hour going through the security footage. What I saw made my hands shake. The cameras showed them entering the store, but the timestamp was wrong. According to the system, they'd entered at 2:17 a.m., but then earlier footage showed them already inside the store at 1:30. Standing perfectly still in various aisles like statues. They'd been there for almost an hour before I noticed them moving. Worse, I found footage from the past week. They'd been coming in every night, always at 2:17, but I had no memory of seeing them before Tuesday. On the recordings, I could see myself ringing use, be their purchases, having conversations with them, but I couldn't remember any of it. I was losing time, or my memory was being altered somehow. Thursday night, I came prepared. I brought my phone and set it to record continuously. I made notes every hour about what was happening and who I saw. If something was messing with my memory, I wanted evidence. At 2:17 exactly, 7 of them walked in. This time, I recognized some of the faces. One of them looked exactly like Janet, the ER nurse who comes in on Tuesdays. But Janet never shops on Thursdays, and this person moved with the same stiff, wrong gait as the others. Another one looked like Frank, the security guard. But Frank was standing right next to me at the customer service counter when his doppelganger walked past. "Frank," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the fake Frank browsing in aisle 3. "You see that guy who looks like you?" Frank squinted at the security monitor. "Yeah, that's weird. Must be my doppelganger." He laughed, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. The fake Frank bought the same items real Frank always bought: microwave burritos and Red Bull. But when he spoke, his voice was wrong. Same tone, same words, but missing something human, like an AI trying to mimic Frank's speech patterns. That's when it clicked. They weren't just random weird customers. They were copies. Perfect physical copies of my regular customers, but something was wrong with their programming. They knew facts about my life because they'd absorbed those memories from the real people they were copying. But whose memories had they taken? And where were the real customers? I started checking our customer database, looking up receipt records for the past month. What I found made me sick. Janet hadn't shopped here in 2 weeks. Her last purchase was January 8th. Frank's last purchase was January 12th. Mrs. Pattersow's, who came in every few nights, hadn't been here since January 15th. All my regular customers were gone, but their copies kept showing up. The things weren't just copying my customers. They'd replace them. Friday night, I called in sick. I couldn't face another shift with those creatures walking around wearing stolen faces. But Saturday morning, my manager called me. "Marcus, what the hell happened last night? Dave said you showed up at 2 a.m. and cleaned out half the store. Took cases of raw meat, all our cleaning chemicals, first aid supplies. He said you paid in cash and left without saying a word." Dave was our weekend night manager. I hadn't been anywhere near the store Friday night. "Dave's mistaken. I was homesick. He showed me the security footage, Marcus. It's definitely you. Same clothes you always wear, same employee badge, but you looked, I don't know, different, sick or something." One of them was wearing my face now. That's when I realized I was probably next. They'd been studying me, learning my routines, my mannerisms. Soon there would be a copy of me working the night shift, and I'd disappear like all the others. I had to figure out how to fight them. But first, I needed to understand what they were. I spent the weekend researching online. Fairbanks has a lot of native Alaskan history, and I found stories that matched what I was seeing. The Inuit have legends about shapeshifters called those who wear others, creatures that could consume a person completely, body, memories, appearance, and take their place in the community. According to the legends, they were almost perfect mimics, but had weaknesses. They couldn't handle certain electromagnetic frequencies. High-pitched electronic sounds could disrupt their nervous systems and force them to reveal their true forms. Our store was full of electronic equipment, registers, security systems, the PA system, fluorescent lights, even the automatic doors. If the legends were true, I could turn Megamart into a weapon. Sunday night, I came in early. Told Dave I was feeling better and wanted to get some inventory work done. After he left, I started preparing. I programmed the PA system to cycle through different frequencies, starting low and gradually increasing. I adjusted the fluorescent lights to flicker at specific intervals. I set all the register displays to strobe. If anyone walked into the store Monday night, they'd be hit with a barrage of electromagnetic interference. At 2:17 a.m. they came, not 7 this time. 15 of them, copies of every regular customer I'd ever had, plus some faces I didn't recognize. They moved in perfect formation like soldiers, no more pretending to be human shoppers. This was an invasion. I hit the switch. The PA system shrieked with feedback. The lights strobed like a nightclub. Every electronic device in the store began emitting high-pitched whines. The sound was awful, like fingernails on chalkboard mixed with a smoke detector. The effect on the shapeshifters was immediate. They started convulsing. Their stolen faces began to melt and shift like wax under heat. I could see their true forms underneath, writhing masses of gray flesh covered in what looked like human skin stretched over impossible anatomy. Some had multiple faces layered on top of each other, like masks they could swap at will. They screamed, but the sounds weren't human, more like air being forced through broken machinery. Several of them collapsed, their bodies unable to maintain human shape under the electromagnetic assault, but some of them were fighting through the interference. The one wearing my face was stumbling toward the service counter, reaching for the PA system controls. I cranked the frequency higher. The lights exploded. Fluorescent tubes burst in showers of sparks and glass. Register screens cracked. The fire alarm joined the cacophony, adding its shriek to the electronic warfare. The shapeshifters began retreating, their all in skin peeling away in chunks. As they fled toward the doors, I could see what they really were underneath. Things that had never been human, wearing our faces like Halloween masks. This last one out was the fake me. Just before it reached the exit, it turned around and spoke in my own voice. "We'll be back, Marcus. We know where your children live." Then it was gone, leaving behind only scattered pieces of synthetic skin and the smell of ozone. I called the police, but what could I tell them? That shapeshifters had been infiltrating Fairbanks by replacing customers at my grocery store? They'd think I'd had a mental breakdown. Instead, I called the regional manager and reported a massive electrical system failure. Store was unsafe, needed immediate inspection and repair. That bought me time to figure out my next move. I spent the next week reaching out to other businesses in town. 24-hour gas stations, fast food places, convenience stores. Asked if they'd noticed any unusual customers lately. Customers who moved wrong, knew things they shouldn't, paid inexact change. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Night shift workers all over Fairbanks had been seeing the same things. Customers who felt wrong, security cameras glitching, regular customers disappearing. The shapeshifters weren't just targeting Megamart. They were systematically replacing people throughout the community, using late-night businesses as hunting grounds. I organized a network of night shift workers, gas station attendants, security guards, hospital staff, dispatchers. We started sharing information, warning each other about suspicious customers. Created a phone tree to alert everyone when the shapeshifters showed up. Most importantly, I figured out how to build portable electromagnetic devices. Small enough to carry, powerful enough to disrupt the creature's nervous systems. I taught other night workers how to make them using parts from electronic stores. It's been 6 months now. The shapeshifters still show up occasionally, but they can't maintain their operations when every night worker in town knows what to look for. We've created an early warning system that saved dozens of people from being replaced. Megamart promoted me to regional security consultant. My new job is traveling to other isolated communities, training night shift workers to recognize and defend against supernatural identity theft. Turns out, Fairbanks wasn't the only place being targeted. I still work nights, but now I'm protecting people instead of just selling them groceries. Emma and Jake are proud of their dad. I told them I help keep communities safe, which is true enough. The shapeshifters are still out there. They're patient, intelligent, and they're learning from their failures. But they made one critical mistake when they came to Fairbanks. They targeted the wrong night manager. And now we're ready for them. My name is Tommy Richardson, and I've been driving for Uber for 3 years now. Started when I was 26, right after college, when my student loans hit me like a truck. $42,000 in debt, working at an insurance office during the day, making barely enough to cover rent and groceries. The night driving seemed like the perfect solution. Decent money, flexible hours, and I actually enjoyed meeting people. But what happened on the night of October 15th, just outside Anchorage, changed everything I thought I knew about who gets into your car when you're driving alone in the dark. Working nights in Anchorage isn't bad, usually. You get your regulars, nurses heading home from late shifts at Providence Hospital, bartenders closing down on 4th Avenue, airport workers catching rides to their cars after the last flights come in. Most people are pretty decent, even the drunk ones. They tip well, tell interesting stories, and I've always felt like I was providing a real service, getting people home safe. My 2018 Honda Accord has been reliable as anything. GPS works perfect, charging ports for phones, clean interior. I take pride in keeping it nice. The plan was simple. Drive nights and weekends, throw every extra dollar at those loans and be debt-free in 2 years. Then I could focus on moving up at the insurance company, maybe start dating seriously, buy a house, normal stuff. My parents always worried about the ride-sharing thing. "Tommy, you're putting strangers in your car every night," my mom would say. "What if something happens?" But in 3 years, the worst I dealt with was maybe a drunk guy throwing up or someone trying to bring an open beer in the car. Alaska has its problems, but violent crime against drivers? Pretty rare. The money was actually helping me build real financial stability for the first time in my life. I was ahead on LOA. And payments, had a small emergency fund going, even started putting a little into savings. For a guy who grew up with his dad working construction and his mom cleaning houses, that felt like winning the lottery. October 15th started normal enough. Thursday night, decent weather for mid-October. I'd finished my day shift, grabbed dinner, and was online by 7 p.m. First few rides were typical. Picked up a couple from downtown going to South Addition, drove a hospital tech to the airport, helped an elderly lady get groceries home from cars. Good tips, friendly conversations. I was feeling optimistic about hitting my weekly goal. Around 11:30 p.m., I got a pickup request from way outside the city. The pin dropped on Old Glen Highway past Eagle River in an area I'd never been to. The passenger name just showed as T. No profile picture. That's not unusual. Lots of people don't bother with photos. But something about the location felt off. It was isolated, no businesses or neighborhoods I could think of. My GPS routed me out through Eagle River, then onto back roads I'd never seen before. The streetlights disappeared after a few miles, and my headlights were cutting through thick darkness. No other cars, no houses, just trees and empty road. I started wondering if this was even a real pickup, or if someone had put in the wrong address. Then I saw him. He was standing under what looked like a broken streetlight, though I couldn't tell if it was actually broken or just wasn't getting power. The guy was tall, really tall. Had to be at least 6'8", maybe 7 feet. Skinny as a rail, wearing a dark coat that seemed too small for his frame. I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. "You call for an Uber?" He nodded and walked to the car. That's when I realized just how big this guy was. When he opened the back door and started getting in, he had to fold himself up like a collapsible chair. His knees hit the back of my seat and his head was pressed against the roof. I immediately felt bad about my car feeling cramped, but there was something else. It got cold inside. Really cold, like someone had cranked the AC. But I had the heater running. "Where are we heading tonight?" I asked, looking in the rearview mirror. His voice came out as a whisper, but it sounded strange. Like there were multiple people talking at the same time, all whispering the same words, just slightly out of sync with each other. "Take me to northernmost point." I typed it into my GPS. Nothing came up. "I'm not finding that address. Can you give me a street name or cross streets?" "It's not on your maps yet," he said in that weird multi-voice whisper. "I'll give you directions." That should have been my first red flag right there. In 3 years of driving, nobody had ever given me directions to a place that wasn't on Google Maps. But the guy was already in my car, and I didn't want to be rude. Maybe it was a new development or something. "Okay, where do we start?" "Continue north," he said. "I'll tell you when to turn." I put the car in drive and started heading up Old Glen Highway. That's when I noticed in my rearview mirror that something was wrong with his reflection. Not wrong exactly, but different. When I looked directly back at him, he seemed normal enough. Just a really tall, thin guy in a dark coat. But in the mirror, his proportions looked different. His arms seemed too long, his head was shaped wrong. "So, what brings you out here so late?" I asked, trying to make normal conversation. "Work," he whispered. "I travel a lot. Different places, different dimensions of service." That was a weird way to put it, but I'd heard stranger things from passengers. "What kind of work?" "Transportation coordination," he said. "I help people get where they need to go." We drove in silence for maybe 10 minutes. The road kept getting narrower, and I was starting to worry about being able to turn around later. There were no street signs, no landmarks, nothing I could use to find my way back. My GPS had stopped trying to route us anywhere. It just showed a blue dot moving through gray space. "Turn left here," the passenger whispered. I looked left. There was no road. "I don't see a turn." "There," he said, and suddenly there was a narrow gravel road cutting into the trees. I swear it hadn't been there a second before, but maybe my headlights just hadn't caught it right. The gravel road was barely wide enough for my car. Branches scraped against the windows as we drove deeper into the woods. My heater was running full blast, but the car kept getting colder. I could see my breath starting to fog. "Hey, are you sure this is right?" I asked. "This doesn't seem like it goes anywhere." That's when he said something that made my blood freeze. "You're Tommy Richardson. You live at 1247 Muldoon Road, apartment 3B. You owe $38,724 in student loans. Your mother's name is Linda. Your father is Robert. You work at Northern Plains Insurance during the day. Your employee ID is NPI 4472. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop on the gravel. "How do you know that?" I turned around to look at him directly. "How do you know any of that?" He smiled and his teeth were too white, too sharp. I know lots of things about lots of people, Tommy. It's part of my job. I reached for my phone to call 911, but there was no signal, not even one bar. We were in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who somehow knew everything about my life, and I had no way to call for help. "Keep driving," he whispered, and somehow it didn't sound like a request. I drove. What else could I do? My hands were shaking on the steering wheel and my mind was racing through every possible explanation. Maybe he was some kind of identity thief who'd hacked my Uber account. Maybe he worked for a collections company and was trying to scare me about my loans. Maybe he was just a creep who researched his drivers online. But how had he known my employee ID? That wasn't public information anywhere. The gravel road opened into a small clearing with what looked like an old cabin. But when my headlights hit it, something was wrong with the perspective. The cabin looked normal from one angle. But when I turned my head slightly, it seemed to be sitting at an impossible angle, like it existed in 3 dimensions that didn't quite match up with each other. "Stop here," the passenger said. I stopped the car but kept the engine running. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I need to get back to the city. I have other rides waiting." He reached into his coat and pulled out what looked like money. Cash, but when he handed it to me, it felt wrong. Too smooth, slightly warm, and when I looked at it closely, the bills seemed to shift between different denominations. First it was 320s, then it looked like 50s. Then I couldn't tell what it was at all. "This covers the fare," he said. "I'll need you again tomorrow night. Same time, same place." "I don't think that's going to happen," I said. He leaned forward, and I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. It smelled like ozone and old copper. "Oh, it will happen, Tommy, because now you're part of this. Now you can see the roads." "See what roads?" But when I looked around, I realized we weren't in the same clearing anymore. Somehow, without driving anywhere, we were back on Old Glen Highway. The passenger was gone. The back seat was empty, like he'd never been there at all. I floored it back toward Anchorage, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. My GPS came back online once I got near Eagle River, and according to it, I'd never left Old Glen Highway. The app showed no record of the trip, no fare, no passenger, no route to any cabin in the woods. But I still had that strange money in my pocket. When I got home, I tried to research the pickup location. I pulled up satellite images, street view, everything I would find. Old Glen Highway was there, but the turnoff we'd taken didn't exist. No gravel road, no cabin, nothing but unbroken forest. I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I told myself I wasn't going to drive. I was going to stay home, watch Netflix, pretend the whole thing had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But at 11:30 p.m. exactly, my phone buzzed with a pickup request. Same location, same passenger name, T. I stared at the notification for a long time. Then I grabbed my keys and went to the car. He was waiting in the same spot, under the same broken streetlight that might not have been broken at all. This time, when he got in the car, I was ready for the cold. I was ready for the weird whisper voice and the impossible directions. What I wasn't ready for was what he said as soon as the door closed. "Good evening, Tommy. Ready to see more of the network?" "What network?" "The transportation network. The real one. The one that connects all places, in all realities." As we drove, he explained things that should have sounded crazy but somehow made perfect sense. He wasn't human exactly. He was what he called a traveler, something that moved between different versions of reality, different dimensions. And he was using ride-sharing apps to map out transportation systems in our world. "Every time a human driver takes me somewhere," he said, "I learn more about how your people move through space, your roads, your patterns, your limitations. It's quite efficient, really." "Why?" I asked. "What's the point?" "Preparation," he said. "My people are coming through. We need to understand how transportation works here before we can start using it properly." That's when I realized I wasn't just giving rides to a weird passenger. I was helping something map out our entire civilization. Over the next several weeks, the rides continued. Every night at 1:30, the same pickup request. Every time he took me somewhere impossible. Roads that existed only when he needed them. Destinations that disappeared from maps as soon as we left them. My car was changing too. The GPS had started showing locations that didn't exist on any official maps. Sometimes when I was driving normal passengers during the day, the route would briefly flicker and show alternate paths, roads that cut through buildings, highways that went straight up into the sky, exits that led to places with names I didn't recognize. Other Uber drivers started reporting weird things. Sarah, who worked the same area as me, said she'd seen my car driving through downtown Anchorage while I was supposedly on a ride to the airport. Another driver claimed he'd seen me picking up passengers at the same time in 3 different locations. The thing that called itself T, though I'd started thinking of it as the Traveler, was getting more comfortable around me. It started explaining things about its dimension, about its people. "Your reality is very rigid," it said one night as we drove through a forest that had definitely been a Walmart parking lot when we entered it. "Very linear. One path from point A to point B. In our dimension, all points exist simultaneously. Transportation is simply a matter of selecting which reality you want to experience." "So why do you need our roads?" I asked. "Because your people think in roads," it said. "Your entire civilization is built around the concept of defined paths between specific locations. When we come through, we'll need to use your existing systems to avoid detection." "Come through for what?" The Traveler was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Have you ever wondered what it would be like if humans were the livestock, Tommy?" I slammed on the brakes. We were suddenly stopped in the middle of my apartment complex parking lot, though I had no memory of driving there. "Get out," I said. "I don't think you understand your situation," the Traveler said. And for the first time, his voice didn't sound like a whisper. It sounded like a growl. "You've been seeing the network for weeks now. You've been traveling the between roads. Do you think you can just stop?" I tried to get out of the car, but the door handle wouldn't move. The locks engaged with a sound like breaking bones. "You see, Tommy, you're not just my driver anymore. You're my anchor. Every time I ride with you, your car becomes more connected to my dimension. Soon, it will exist in both realities simultaneously. And when that happens, you'll come with me." The windows started fogging over, but not from cold this time. The fog was moving, swirling in patterns that looked almost like faces. Through the fog, I could see glimpses of the Traveler's dimension, a place where the sky was the color of old blood, and things that might have once been human wandered around in groups, their eyes vacant, their movements controlled by towering figures that looked like shadows with too many arms. "My people are very interested in your transportation systems," the Traveler continued. "Uber, Lyft, taxis, buses, all the ways humans move through their environment. Once we understand the patterns, we can replace the drivers. Gradually, quietly. Humans will get into cars driven by my people, and they'll never arrive at their destinations. They'll arrive at ours." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to help us finish the network map. And when you do, you'll be the first human to see our world properly. Consider it a reward for your service." The fog cleared, and we were parked outside my apartment building. The Traveler was gone. But I could feel something different about the car. The steering wheel felt warm under my hands, and the dashboard lights seemed brighter, more alive. When I checked my phone, I had 17 5-star ratings from passengers I'd never picked up. I stopped driving for Uber the next day, told my bandit self I was done, that I'd find another way to pay off the loans. But that night at 11:30, my car started itself. I was inside my apartment, keys on the kitchen counter, when I heard the between dimensions. "You'll never make it back to your reality." "Maybe," I said, pulling out the last wire I could find. "But neither will you." The car died completely. No lights, no engine, no electronics at all. And the Traveler disappeared. The tear in reality snapped shut like a rubber band. I was stranded at the airport with a completely dead car and no phone. But it was the real airport this time, the one I recognized. Security found me around 3 a.m. sitting in the parking lot next to my destroyed Honda Accord, trying to explain why I'd apparently taken apart my entire dashboard. The police were surprisingly understanding. Turns out dozens of ride-sharing drivers across the country had been reporting similar experiences. Strange passengers, impossible routes, technology malfunctions. Most had been dismissed as stress-related incidents, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. I spent 3 days answering questions from people who said they worked for the government but wouldn't tell me which agency. They were very interested in the details about the traveler, about the dimensional tear, about the organic vehicles I'd seen. When I asked if other drivers had reported similar things, they just said the situation was being addressed. My car was totaled, obviously. Insurance didn't cover intentional destruction of vehicle electronics to prevent interdimensional invasion, so I was stuck with the payment on a car I couldn't drive. But the loan payments weren't a problem anymore because I wasn't working at the insurance company either. Turned out, taking 3 days off to talk to government agents about supernatural experiences wasn't covered by our sick leave policy. 6 months later, I got a call from one of those government agents. They offered me a consulting position helping them identify anomalous transportation incidents. Apparently the ride-sharing invasion had been more widespread than anyone had realized, and they needed people who'd experienced it firsthand to help recognize the signs. The pay was better than insurance work and driving combined, enough to knock out my student loans in a year and start building a real savings account. I also started a side business helping other gig workers who'd had similar experiences. Turns out, supernatural entities had been infiltrating all kinds of on-demand services. Food delivery, package shipping, even house cleaning services. There was a whole network of people who'd encountered things that shouldn't exist, and most of them had no one to talk to about it. Now I spend my time traveling between cities, interviewing drivers and delivery workers, looking for signs of dimensional incursions. I've helped shut down 3 more crossing points and identified dozens of compromised drivers who were unknowingly serving as anchors for invasive entities. The work is dangerous, and I'll never be able to drive for a ride-sharing company again. Something about my exposure to the traveler's dimension left me permanently sensitive to reality distortions. If I try to use GPS navigation or ride-sharing apps, I start seeing routes to places that don't exist. But I'm protecting people. Real people going about their normal lives who have no idea that getting into the wrong car could mean ending up in a dimension where humans are livestock. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't destroyed my car that night. Would I have ended up like Marcus, driving for eternity with empty eyes and mechanical movements? Or would I have fought it somehow? I guess I'll never know. But every time I help another driver understand what they experienced, every time I help shut down another crossing point, I know I made the right choice. The transportation network is safe, at least for now. But I keep watching because I know the travelers' people haven't given up. They're just waiting for us to let our guard down. And trust me, as someone who's seen what they can do, we can't, between dimensions. You'll never make it back to your reality. Maybe, I said, pulling out the last wire I could find. But neither will you. The car died completely. No lights, no engine, no electronics at all. And the traveler disappeared. The tear in reality snapped shut like a rubber band. I was stranded at the airport with a completely dead car and no phone. But it was the real airport this time, the one I recognized. Security found me around 3 a.m. sitting in the parking lot next to my destroyed Honda Accord, trying to explain why I'd apparently taken apart my entire dashboard. The police were surprisingly understanding. Turns out dozens of ride-sharing drivers across the country had been reporting similar experiences. Strange passengers, impossible routes, technology malfunctions. Most had been dismissed as stress-related incidents, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. I spent 3 days answering questions from people who said they worked for the government but wouldn't tell me which agency. They were very interested in the details about the traveler, about the dimensional tear, about the organic vehicles I'd seen. When I asked if other drivers had reported similar things, they just said the situation was being addressed. My car was totaled, obviously. Insurance didn't cover intentional destruction of vehicle electronics to prevent interdimensional invasion, so I was stuck with the payment on a car I couldn't drive. But the loan payments weren't a problem anymore because I wasn't working at the insurance company either. Turned out, taking 3 days off to talk to government agents about supernatural experiences wasn't covered by our sick leave policy. 6 months later, I got a call from one of those government agents. They offered me a consulting position helping them identify anomalous transportation incidents. Apparently the ride-sharing invasion had been more widespread than anyone had realized, and they needed people who'd experienced it firsthand to help recognize the signs. The pay was better than insurance work and driving combined, enough to knock out my student loans in a year and start building a real savings account. I also started a side business helping other gig workers who'd had similar experiences. Turns out, supernatural entities had been infiltrating all kinds of on-demand services. Food delivery, package shipping, even house cleaning services. There was a whole network of people who'd encountered things that shouldn't exist, and most of them had no one to talk to about it. Now I spend my time traveling between cities, interviewing drivers and delivery workers, looking for signs of dimensional incursions. I've helped shut down 3 more crossing points and identified dozens of compromised drivers who were unknowingly serving as anchors for invasive entities. The work is dangerous, and I'll never be able to drive for a ride-sharing company again. Something about my exposure to the traveler's dimension left me permanently sensitive to reality distortions. If I try to use GPS navigation or ride-sharing apps, I start seeing routes to places that don't exist. But I'm protecting people, real people, going about their normal lives who have no idea that getting into the wrong car could mean ending up in a dimension where humans are livestock. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't destroyed my car that night. Would I have ended up like Marcus, driving for eternity with empty eyes and mechanical movements? Or would I have fought it somehow? I guess I'll never know. But every time I help another driver understand what they experienced, every time I help shut down another crossing point, I know I made the right choice. The transportation network is safe, at least for now. But I keep watching because I know the travelers' people haven't given up. They're just waiting for us to let our guard down. And trust me, as someone who's seen what they can do, we can't afford to let that happen. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working the night shift at Big Eddie's Diner for 8 months now. I'm a single mom with a 6-year-old daughter named Sophia, and this job keeps food on our table and a roof over our heads. The diner sits right at the junction where Highway 3 meets the Parks Highway, about 20 miles outside Anchorage. It's one of those 24-hour truck stops that never sleeps, always has the coffee brewing and the grill ready. I work the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most people think it's crazy, but I actually love it. The tips are good, the regular truckers are like family, and Eddie, he's the owner, always makes sure I get to my car safely. Plus, my neighbor Mrs. Chen watches Sophia during my shifts, and I pick her up right after work. We've got a good routine going, and for the first time in years, life feels stable. I was even thinking about taking some day classes at the community college. The diner itself is nothing fancy. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, and a long counter with spinning stools. The kitchen's small but efficient, and there's a pie case that I stock fresh every night. We get a steady flow of customers, long-haul truckers stopping for coffee and a hot meal, night shift workers from the hospital and airport, sometimes tourists who took a wrong turn. I know most of the regulars by name and their usual orders. There's Jimmy, who drives for Alaska Freight Lines, always wants his eggs over easy and wheat toast. Big Mike from Fairbanks Trucking, black coffee and apple pie. Frank the mechanic gets off at midnight and stops by for a burger before heading home. It's honest work and I'm good at it. The coffee's always fresh, the grill's always hot, and I remember every face that walks through that door. What I couldn't have known was that remembering faces would almost get me and my daughter killed. It's St. Arted on a Tuesday night in October. The first snowfall had just hit, and the roads were getting slick. I was restocking the pie case around 2:30 a.m. when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up and saw a man I'd never seen before. He was pale, not just white, but actually pale like he'd been sick for months. Thin, too, wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned. A brown coat that might have been nice 20 years ago, dark pants with creases that were too sharp. He moved slow and quiet, like he was walking on ice. "Coffee, please," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. I poured him a cup and watched him settle into the corner booth, the one furthest from the door. He didn't touch the coffee, just sat there staring at the other customers. Jimmy was at the counter finishing his pie. Big Mike was in his usual booth going over his logbook. Frank had stopped in early, some emergency at the garage. Normal Tuesday night crowd. But something felt different with this pale guy sitting there. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop a few degrees. I checked the thermostat, but it was fine. The fluorescent lights above his booth started flickering, that annoying buzz getting louder. I made a mental note to tell Eddie about it in the morning. "Excuse me," the pale man called out. His voice carried further than it should have for how quiet he spoke. "That gentleman at the counter, Jimmy, is it? Where does he usually drive?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'm sorry, I don't give out information about customers." But Jimmy had heard him. "Alaska Freight Lines," he said, friendly enough. "Been running the Anchorage to Fairbanks route for 12 years. The pale man smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. 12 years? That's a long time on those roads. Dangerous roads, especially in winter. "You drive truck?" Jimmy asked. In a manner of speaking, the pale man's eyes moved to Big Mike. "And you, sir? Your route?" I don't know why, but I wanted to tell them both to stop talking. Something about this guy made my skin crawl. But Mike was already answering, telling him about the Fairbanks Prudhoe Bay run, how he'd been doing it for 8 years. The pale man nodded like he was taking notes. 8 years? Impressive. Tell me, do you ever see things out there? On those long, empty stretches? What kind of things? Mike asked, but his voice had changed. Less friendly now. Oh, you know. Lights where there shouldn't be lights. Cars on roads that don't exist anymore. People walking where no one should be walking. Frank looked up from his burger. "Mister, you feeling okay? You look sick." The pale man's eyes fixed on Frank. "The garage on 6th Street, correct? You work nights there. Must see a lot of stranded motorists. People whose cars break down in unfortunate places." Frank hadn't told him where he worked. I was sure of it. But before I could say anything, the pale man was asking Frank about his schedule, what nights he worked, what time he got off. That's when Jimmy stood up. "You know what, Maria? I think I'll take that pie to go after all." Big Mike was already pulling out his wallet. Frank wrapped his burger in a napkin and headed for the door. Within 10 minutes, all my regular customers had cleared out, leaving me alone with the pale man and his untouched coffee. "Quiet night," he said, still smiling that awful smile. I went back to the kitchen and pretended to clean, but I kept watching him through the service window. He never moved, never blinked that I could see. Just sat there until about 4 a.m., then got up and left. No payment, no goodbye. Just gone. Eddie found the coffee cup on the table the next morning. It was still full, but the coffee inside was ice cold. Not room temperature cold. Ice cold, with frost forming on the rim. The pale man came back the next night. Same time, same booth, same untouched coffee. This time, only 2 of my regulars showed up, and they both left early. The night after that, it was just me and him until dawn. I started doing research during my breaks. The diner has an old computer in the back office, and I spent hours searching for anything about highway disappearances, truck stops, pale men in old-fashioned clothes. What I found made my hands shake. The Anchorage Daily News, October 15, 1987. 3rd trucker vanishes on Parks Highway. The article described a man seen at various truck stops along the route before drivers disappeared. Pale, thin, wearing outdated clothes. Same description. I kept digging. Similar stories from 1993, 1998, 2003, 2008, 2014. Always the same pattern. The pale man would show up at truck stops, talk to drivers about their routes, and then those drivers would disappear somewhere on the highway. Their trucks would be found empty, no signs of struggle, no trace of the drivers. But here's the thing that made me sick. In every newspaper photo from those different years, when they showed security footage or eyewitness sketches, it was the same face. Exactly the same. No aging, no changes. The same pale, thin man I was serving coffee to every night. I tried calling in sick the next night, but Eddie was worried about me, said I sounded scared. He was right. I was terrified. But I was more worried about my regular customers, Jimmy, Mike, Frank, all the others. This thing, whatever it was, had been hunting truck drivers for over 30 years, and I was helping it by accident. That's when I decided to do something about it. I went to St. Mary's Catholic Church that afternoon and talked to Father Rodriguez. Told him I needed protection from something evil. He gave me a small bag of blessed salt and a book of prayers. I stopped at the hardware store and bought a lighter and a can of WD-40. If this thing was supernatural, maybe fire would hurt it. That night, I warned every coos. Tomer who came in. Told them about the pale man, the disappearances, everything I'd found. Some believed me, some thought I was crazy, but most started avoiding the diner altogether, the pale man noticed. Business seems slow, he said around 3 a.m., still sitting in his corner booth. Yeah, well, word gets around when weird stuff happens. His smile disappeared. What kind of weird stuff, Maria? I hadn't told him my name. My name tag was pinned inside my apron where he couldn't see it. You know exactly what I mean, I said. He stood up slowly. As he moved, the lights above his booth went completely out. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Maria Santos, apartment 4B on Willow Street. 6-year-old daughter, Sophia. Stays with the neighbor during your shifts. My blood turned to ice. How do you know that? I know lots of things. I know Sophia walks to school every morning at 8:15. I know she stops at the playground on Maple Street every afternoon. I know exactly where she is right now. I grabbed the kitchen knife I'd hidden under the register. Stay away from my daughter. That depends entirely on you. See, I've been feeding in this area for decades. Your little diner has been very helpful. But now you're scaring away my food. He wasn't human. I could see that now. His skin was too white, too perfect. His eyes were completely black, no pupils, no iris. And when he opened his mouth to speak, I saw teeth like broken glass. What are you? Hungry, he said. Always hungry. Your truckers have such rich, full lives. Years of memories, experiences, love. It sustains me for months at a time. You're killing them. I'm feeding. It's what I do. And you've been helping me choose the best ones. The ones with families, responsibilities, regular routes. The ones whose disappearance causes the most flavor. The front door chimed and 3 figures walked in. I recognized them immediately. Jimmy, Big Mike, and Frank. But something was wrong with them. They moved too stiff, too mechanical. Their skin was gray, their eyes were empty, and they all wore the same horrible smile. My previous meals, the pale man explained. They serve me now, forever. The zombie truckers started walking toward me. Jimmy's head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Mike's left arm hung limp and broken. Frank's face was half caved in like he'd been in an accident. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the WD-40 and lighter. The salt was in my pocket. I didn't have a plan, just pure panic and anger. This thing had threatened my daughter. That was a mistake. Maria, the pale man called out. There's nowhere to run. Join us willingly, and I might let Sophia live. Fight me, and I'll make her suffer before I feed. That's when I stopped being scared and started being furious. I poured the blessed salt in a circle around the grill and turned all the burners on high. The kitchen filled with heat and the smell of gas. The pale man stepped through the service window, moving like smoke. But when he hit the salt line, he screamed. Real pain. Whatever this thing was, the blessed salt hurt it. His zombie truckers came through the kitchen door, but they moved slow and clumsy. I sprayed WD-40 at Jimmy and lit it with the lighter. He went up like a torch, screaming and thrashing until he collapsed into ash. "You have no idea what you're doing," the pale man hissed. "I am ancient. I am eternal. I am—" "About to burn," I said, and sprayed him with the WD-40. The flame caught him immediately, but it wasn't normal fire. It was white hot and made a sound like screaming wind. He thrashed and clawed at the air, his perfect pale skin bubbling and melting. The other zombie truckers collapsed the moment he started burning. The pale man's scream got higher and higher until the windows in the kitchen cracked. Then he was gone. Nothing left but a smell like burnt plastic and old meat. The Alaska State Troopers found evidence linking the pale man to over this. Missing truckers dating back to 1987. They couldn't explain how one person could be responsible for disappearances across 4 decades, but they officially closed all those cases. Eddie gave me a raise and the day shift. Word spread among truckers about what happened, and now Big Eddie's Diner is known as the safest truck stop in Alaska. Drivers go out of their way to stop here, and business is better than ever. I used the reward money from helping solve those disappearances to start taking classes at the community college. Sophia is proud of her mom. She tells everyone at school that I fought a monster and won. The diner still gets cold sometimes, usually around 3 a.m. The lights still flicker occasionally. But whatever was hunting my customers is gone now, and I make sure it stays that way. Every night before I clock out, I check the salt line around the kitchen. Every morning, I say a prayer for the truckers who never made it home. And every day, I remember that some jobs ask more of you than just showing up and doing the work. Sometimes you have to fight monsters to keep the people you serve safe, and sometimes that's exactly what makes the job worth doing. My name is Amanda Torres, and I've been grooming dogs for 12 years. I started right out of high school in Phoenix, working at a fancy pet salon where rich people brought their poodles. I learned how to handle scared animals, read their body language, and keep them calm when they didn't want to be touched. I've dealt with aggressive pit bulls, neurotic chihuahuas, and everything in between. But what happened during the winter of 2020 at a sled dog kennel outside Nome, Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about animals. I was 29 when I discovered that some creatures in the wilderness aren't animals at all. After my divorce, I needed a fresh start and good money. My ex-husband got the house, and I was tired of Arizona's endless heat. When I saw the job posting for a dog groomer at an Iditarod training kennel in Alaska, paying 3 times what I made in Phoenix, I applied immediately. Jake Peterson, the owner, hired me over the phone after I sent photos of my work. He said most groomers couldn't handle the isolation or the cold, but I was desperate enough to try anything. The kennel was 15 miles outside Nome, accessible only by snowmobile or dog sled. No cell service, no internet, just me, Jake, and 40 Siberian Huskies. Jake lived in the main cabin while I got a smaller heated building with my grooming station, sleeping area, and a tiny kitchen. The dogs lived in insulated houses arranged in neat rows, each with a dog run and feeding station. Everything was efficient and well organized. My job was simple: keep 40 racing dogs in perfect condition. That meant daily brushing, nail trims, paw care, and checking for injuries. During training season, these dogs ran 50 miles a day in temperatures that could freeze your breath. Their coats had to be perfect to protect them from frostbite. Their paws needed constant care to prevent ice cuts and pad damage. It was hard work, but I loved it immediately. The first month was perfect. The Huskies were beautiful animals, blue eyes, thick coats, and personalities as different as people. There was Kodiak, the lead dog who watched everything with intelligence that seemed almost human. Luna, a smaller female who loved having her ears scratched. Bear, a massive male who looked fierce but was gentle as a lamb. They trusted me completely, which meant everything in my line of work. Jake was respectful and professional. He handled the training and racing while I kept the dogs looking and feeling their best. We had a routine. He'd be out with the teams by dawn, I'd start grooming after breakfast, and we'd both be done by evening. The isolation didn't bother me. After years of dealing with demanding pet owners in Phoenix, the quiet was a blessing. Around week 6, things changed. It started with the dogs' behavior during their 11:47 p.m. feeding. Every single night, all 40 dogs would suddenly stop eating and bark in perfect unison at the tree line about 100 yards away. Not random barking, synchronized, like they were responding to something only they could hear. After exactly 30 seconds, they'd go completely silent and return to their food like nothing happened. I asked Jake about it, but he just shrugged. Wolves, maybe. Or a bear. Dogs got better hearing than us. But I'd worked with dogs my entire adult life, and this wasn't normal pack behavior. This was organized, like they were communicating with something in the forest. Then I started finding things that shouldn't exist. Stone cairns, neat stacks of rocks with pieces of caribou antler balanced perfectly on top. 3 of them arranged in a triangle around the kennel, definitely not there when I arrived. When I asked Jake about them, he claimed they'd always been there, but I knew every inch of the property. The forest would go completely silent at random times. No wind through the trees, no small animals scurrying, no settling snow. Even the dogs would stop panting and hold their breath, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. During these silent periods, my ears would pop constantly from pressure changes, and the dogs would shake their heads and paw at their ears. Bright red strips of fabric started appearing overnight, tied to fence posts and trees around the property. They fluttered in winds I couldn't feel, moving when the air was completely still. The fabric looked new, like someone had just cut it from a fresh bolt, but there was no fabric store within 300 miles. My grooming tools started behaving strangely. Every morning, I'd find them arranged in perfect geometric patterns on my work table, circles, triangles, straight lines. I always put them away randomly at night, but something was organizing them while I slept. The dogs would watch me discover these arrangements, tilting their heads like they were trying to tell me something important. The morning I found the handprints changed everything. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the kennel in a clean white blanket. Around each doghouse, pressed deep into the snow, were handprints. But not human handprints. These had 7 or 8 fingers, and the palms were twice the size of my hands. Whatever made them had been touching the dogs' houses, maybe checking on them. The dogs weren't scared of the prints. In fact, they seemed calmer than usual, like whatever made them was a friend rather than a threat. Kodiak, the lead dog, actually wagged his tail when he sniffed the print near his house. That scared me more than if he'd been terrified. I started tasting metal constantly, like I'd been chewing on pennies. The dogs began refusing their regular food, turning their noses away from kibble they'd eaten happily for weeks. But they were still healthy, still energetic. Something else was feeding them. Jake left for Anchorage that week to pick up supplies, leaving me alone with 2. He dogs for 3 days. That's when I heard the voice calling my name from the forest. Jake's voice, perfect in every way, asking me to come help him with something in the trees. But Jake was 200 miles away, and I had the only snowmobile. The voice called for hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding. The dogs would prick their ears when they heard it, but never barked or seemed alarmed. They knew it wasn't really Jake, but they weren't afraid of whatever was making the sound. I saw it clearly for the first time on Jake's second night away. Something tall and pale moving between the trees at the forest edge, walking upright but with limbs that bent wrong. Arms too long, fingers that ended in what looked like black claws. It moved with purpose, not shambling like a bear or darting like a wolf. The creature would stand just inside the tree line for hours, watching me work with the dogs. It tilted its head when I brushed their coats, leaned forward when I trimmed their nails. It was studying me, trying to understand what I was doing. The dogs would glance at it occasionally, but never with fear, more like acknowledgement. I found clean bones arranged in spirals near the kennel. Dog bones, picked perfectly clean and bleached white. But all 40 of our dogs were accounted for, healthy and happy. The bones were old, maybe from dogs that had lived here years before I arrived. A worn path appeared in the snow, circling the entire kennel property at exactly 100 yards distance. Something had been walking the same route repeatedly, wearing down the snow in a perfect circle. The path was too wide for human feet, too deep for normal weight. Every morning brought new stone cairns, getting closer to the kennel buildings. Each had different objects balanced on top. Polished stones, pieces of carved wood, small metal items that looked handmade. They weren't threat,
Achpos.
they were gifts. Something was trying to communicate through presence. The dogs started howling in specific patterns that almost sounded like language. 3 short howls, pause, 2 long ones, pause, then a single rising note. They'd do this sequence dozens of times, like they were trying to teach me their communication system. When Jake returned from Anchorage, I tried to tell him about the creature, the gifts, the strange behavior. He listened politely, but clearly thought the isolation was getting to me. City girl's not used to wilderness sounds, he said with a smile. Gets to everyone eventually. But the next morning we found fresh killed caribou arranged in neat piles near the dog houses. The meat was clean, perfectly butchered, still warm despite the freezing temperature. No blood trail, no drag marks. Something had killed and prepared this meat specifically for our dogs. Jake was puzzled but practical. Free food's free food, he said, but I could see he was shaken. This wasn't normal predator behavior. Wolves don't butcher their kills and deliver them gift-wrapped. The dogs ate the fresh meat eagerly, like they'd been expecting it. They left their regular kibble completely untouched, choosing the wild meat over processed food. Whatever was feeding them knew their preferences better than we did. I started leaving gifts in return: canned soup, crackers, a warm blanket. Every morning they were gone, replaced by more polished stones and carved wood pieces. We were trading with something intelligent, something that understood reciprocity. The creature began appearing during daylight, standing openly at the forest edge instead of hiding. It was humanoid, but wrong. Skin like pale leather stretched over a frame that was almost but not quite human-shaped. Its eyes reflected light like an animal's, but held intelligence I recognized. Ancient intelligence, patient and curious. The morning it approached the fence changed everything. I was grooming Luna when I noticed the dogs had all stopped what they were doing, looking toward the tree line. A creature stepped out of the forest and walked slowly toward the kennel, stopping just outside the fence. Up close I could see it clearly. 7 feet tall, pale gray skin, arms that hung past its knees. The hands had 8 long fingers, ending in black claws, but the claws looked more like tools than weapons. Its face was almost human: 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but the proportions were stretched, elongated. It made sounds that might have been attempts at human speech. My name, repeated slowly like it was practicing pronunciation. Amanda. Amanda. The voice was Jake's voice, but coming from this creature's throat. The dogs pressed against the fence, tails wagging, trying to get closer to it. They weren't afraid. They were welcoming an old friend. Kodiak whined and pawed at the fence like he wanted to play. I realized it had been protecting the kennel all along. The stone cairns were boundary markers, warning other predators to stay away. The gifts were offerings of friendship. The fresh meat was its way of caring for creatures it had grown to love. When a wolf pack approached the kennel 2 nights later, I watched from my window as the creature intercepted them at the tree line. No violence, no fighting, just a brief interaction before the wolves turned and disappeared into the forest. They understood this was claimed territory. Over the following weeks, I began to understand our arrangement. The creature appeared only during the deepest cold, when temperatures dropped below -30. It was tied to winter, to the harshest season when survival required cooperation. It controlled the weather around the kennel somehow. Blizzards would split apart when they hit our property, creating a pocket of calm air while storms raged around us. The dogs never suffered from the brutal cold that should have been life-threatening. The stone cairns expanded outward, marking an ever-growing territory that included our property as protected space. Other animals, wolves, bears, even wolverines, stopped approaching the kennel entirely. We lived in a safe zone maintained by an ancient guardian. Jake eventually accepted what I'd been telling him, especially after the creature saved his life during a late-season blizzard. Jake had gotten lost returning from a training run, and the creature guided him home through winds that would have frozen him to death. "Been here since before my grandfather's time," Jake admitted. "Family always knew something watched over this place. Why you think we never lost a dog to predators? Why the best sled dogs in Alaska come from this kennel?" When spring arrived and temperatures rose above freezing, the creature retreated deeper into the wilderness. But the stone cairns remained, marking the territory as still protected. The dogs seemed to understand the arrangement. They'd look toward the forest with expectation as winter approached each year. I've worked at the kennel for 5 years now. Every winter, when the temperature drops and the snow piles deep, my pale guardian returns. It brings gifts, fresh meat, and protection from the harsh Alaskan wilderness. The dogs welcome it like family, and I've learned to do the same. The creature and I have developed our own communication system. It understands basic commands now. Stay back when I'm working with nervous dogs. Thank you when it brings meat. Be careful when storms approach. It's learned to mimic not just Jake's voice but mine as well, though it rarely uses the ability. Local Inupiat elders weren't surprised when I finally told them about my experience. Tall, pale ones, they call them. Ancient protectors who form bonds with humans who respect their territory and treat animals with kindness. They've been watching over certain locations for generations, ensuring that those who live in harmony with the wilderness receive protection during the harshest months. I still groom sled dogs in the Alaskan wilderness. I still love the Asolas, Tion, the work, and the incredible animals I care for daily. But now I know I'm not alone out here. Something ancient and intelligent watches over this place, and the 40 huskies I care for are part of a family that includes a guardian most people would never believe exists. Every winter night at 11:47 p.m., the dogs still bark in perfect unison toward the tree line. But now I understand. They're not barking in fear or confusion. They're saying hello to an old friend, welcoming back the protector who keeps us all safe in the endless Alaskan winter. The arrangement works perfectly for all of us. The creature gets companionship and purpose. The dogs get protection and fresh meat. And I get to do work I love in one of the most beautiful and dangerous places on Earth, knowing that something far older and wiser than any of us is watching over our little family in the wilderness.